At first, I thought my daughter was joking. It was just a normal Sunday dinner. Rice still steaming, fish sauce in the middle of the table, the television talking somewhere in the background. Then suddenly, my 14-year-old daughter looked up from her phone and asked me something that made my chest tighten instantly. "Mom, when I grow up, do I have to work?" I laughed softly at first. "What do you mean?" She turned her phone toward me. A young man was dancing beside a sports car. Words flashed across the screen. "I quit my job at 25. Now I make money while sleeping." My daughter looked at me carefully. "Can't I just do that?" For 5 seconds, I said nothing, because deep inside, I realized she wasn't asking about jobs. She was asking about life. And I was terrified of giving the wrong answer. So instead of yelling, instead of giving one of those tired adult speeches, I put my chopsticks down and quietly told her, "That's a very important question. Give me 3 days to think about it." She looked surprised. Maybe because parents usually answer immediately. We interrupt, we lecture, we panic. But that night after she went to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen for a very long time. And suddenly, memories I had buried years ago started coming back, one by one. The smell of hospital halls, the sound of my mother crying softly at 2 a.m., the cold glow of my banking app showing numbers I could not survive on. Fear. So much fear. 3 days later, I called my daughter into my office. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. She walked in holding her phone, probably expecting another speech about working hard and studying hard. Instead, I opened a notebook and slowly wrote 3 phrases: labor slavery, honest work, work you love. My daughter frowned immediately. "What's the difference?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Then I said something I had never fully admitted out loud before. "When you were born, I was terrified every single day." Her eyes widened slightly. She had never heard me talk like that. Most children think their parents were always adults, always strong, always calm. They never see the frightened human underneath. I took a slow breath. "You were only 3 months old when everything collapsed." And suddenly, I was back there again. Year 2011. I was 28. Your grandmother had cancer. The apartment investment I believed would save our future had lost more than half its value overnight. Your father was working 2 jobs, and one night, at almost 2 in the morning, I sat alone outside the hospital, staring at my phone. There was barely enough money left for milk, medicine, and rent. I remember hearing another baby crying somewhere down the hallway, while I quietly prayed your grandmother would survive 1 more month. That was the first time in my life I understood what real fear felt like. Not movie fear, not heartbreak fear, survival fear. I looked at my daughter carefully. "That's labor slavery," she stayed silent. "When you work because you have no choice, because hunger is standing behind you, because someone you love needs medicine, that's not freedom." My daughter slowly lowered her phone onto the desk. For the first time, she was truly listening. I pointed at the second phrase, honest work. This is how most adults live. I told her about the security guard in our apartment building, the man who smiled at her every morning before school, the same man who asked her after exams, "How did you do?" "He works 12 hours a day," I said softly. "Not because he's a failure, because he's feeding 2 children through college." She looked down quietly. "TikTok never shows people like him," I continued, "because people who are quietly carrying families on their backs usually don't have time to film motivational videos." The room became very still after that. Then finally, she asked the question I knew was coming. "So what about the third one? Work you love?" I smiled sadly. "This is where social media confuses people." She looked at me carefully. "They think successful people don't work anymore," I said. "But the truth is, they work constantly." I told her about a woman I knew who owned a small online business. Every morning she woke up at 5 to pack orders before sunrise. No boss, no office. but she still worked harder than most people. Why? Because she loved building something that belonged to her. Then I told her about teachers answering student messages late at night, writers who forget to eat while creating stories, doctors who stay awake through exhaustion because they care about saving someone. They're still working, I whispered. They just don't feel trapped while doing it. My daughter stared at the three phrases for a long time. Then suddenly she asked something so quietly it almost broke my heart. Mom, were you ever happy working? The question hit me harder than she realized. Because the truth was, for many years, no. I worked because I was scared. Scared of debt. Scared of failure. Scared of disappointing everyone. There were mornings I sat in my car before work, trying not to cry before walking inside. There were nights I came home too exhausted to even speak. And the worst part? I slowly stopped recognizing myself. I became a machine pretending to be a person. But then, something changed years later. I started writing, at first just small things online. Thoughts about parenting, money, fear, the emotional wounds Vietnamese parents never talk about openly. Parents started messaging me. One mother wrote, "I thought I was the only one afraid all the time." Another father said, "Your words helped me speak gently to my son tonight." And for the first time in years, I woke up excited. Not because I had to work, because I wanted to. I looked at my daughter. That's when I understood something important. She whispered, "What?" "The goal of life is not avoiding work." I paused. "The goal is finding work that doesn't slowly kill your soul." My daughter looked down at the notebook again. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Then after a long silence, she asked the question that truly frightened me. "What if I never find that kind of work?" The room suddenly felt heavier. Because that was the real fear hiding underneath everything. Not laziness, not greed. Fear. Fear of waking up one day trapped inside a life you hate. And honestly, I didn't know how to answer her right away. Because deep down, part of me was still asking myself the exact same question. I didn't answer my daughter immediately. Because some questions deserve honesty more than comfort. Outside the window, rain slid slowly down the glass. My daughter sat quietly across from me, waiting. Still only 14, but already afraid of wasting her life. And suddenly, I realized something painful. Children today are growing up terrified. Not of war, not of hunger, but of becoming ordinary. Social media had convinced them that normal life was failure. A stable job? Failure. Working 8 hours? Failure. Not becoming rich before 30? Failure. Even rest started looking like weakness. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Then I asked her something unexpected. "Do you know what scares me most?" She shook her head. "I'm afraid one day you'll think your value depends on how impressive your life looks online." The room became quiet again. Then she whispered softly, "Maybe it already does." That sentence hit me harder than anything else that night. Because she didn't say it dramatically. She said it honestly. Like a child confessing something heavy she had been carrying alone for a long time. I looked at her carefully. "When did you start feeling that way?" She hesitated, then finally answered, "When I see everyone else succeeding already." I almost smiled sadly. 14 years old, and already feeling behind in life. I asked quietly, "What does succeeding mean?" She looked embarrassed now. Having money, freedom, not struggling like adults. There it was, the real wound, not laziness, fear of suffering, fear of becoming exhausted, like the grown-ups around her. I understood. Because children notice more than we think. They hear us arguing about bills. They see us staring at screens late at night. They hear the tiredness in our voices when we come home from work. Sometimes, parents accidentally teach children to fear adulthood. Not through words, but through exhaustion. I stood up slowly and walked toward the bookshelf near my desk. Then, I pulled out an old photo album. Dust floated softly through the room as I opened it. Inside were pictures my daughter had never seen before. There was one of me holding her as a baby outside the hospital. My hair messy, eyes swollen from lack of sleep, still smiling somehow. Then another photo. Me asleep at the dining table beside my laptop. Receipts everywhere. Coffee spilled beside unfinished paperwork. My daughter stared quietly. "You look tired." I laughed softly. I was. Then I pointed at another picture. In it, her grandmother was sitting beside me in a wheelchair during chemotherapy. Both of us smiling at the camera, even though we were terrified. "That year," I whispered, "I thought I was drowning." My daughter's eyes softened. I continued slowly. "But do you know what saved me?" She shook her head. "Not money." I pointed gently at the photographs. "People." I told her about the security guard downstairs who carried groceries to our apartment when I was too exhausted. The neighbor who secretly left soup outside our door during the hardest months. Her father working silently through fever because he refused to let the family collapse. And suddenly, I realized tears were forming in my eyes. Because back then, I thought I was failing. But looking back now, we were simply surviving together. I looked at my daughter carefully. The internet teaches people to admire independence too much. She listened silently. But real life is built by people helping each other carry heavy things. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly she asked, "Mom, if working is so hard, why do people keep going?" The question stayed hanging in the room, and honestly, it might have been the most important question she asked all night. I sat back down slowly. Then I answered as truthfully as I could. Because meaningful things are usually hard. She frowned slightly. I smiled gently. Love is hard. Raising children is hard. Building trust is hard. Learning who you are is hard. I paused. But hard doesn't always mean bad. She looked down at the notebook again. Labor slavery. Honest work. Work you love. Then softly, almost afraid to ask, she whispered, "What if I choose wrong?" I knew very well. Because most adults are still haunted by it too. What if I pick the wrong career, the wrong dream, the wrong life? I reached over and gently turned her phone face down on the desk. Then I told her something nobody told me when I was young. You are allowed to change. She looked up immediately. You don't need to figure out your entire life at 14. I smiled. Honestly, most adults at 40 still don't fully know themselves. That made her laugh a little, and the tension in the room finally softened. Then I said something I hoped she would remember years later. The dangerous thing is not choosing the wrong job. I paused. The dangerous thing is slowly becoming someone you no longer recognize. Her expression changed slightly after hearing that, like something inside her understood. Then suddenly she reached for the notebook and drew an arrow beside the 3 phrases. I watched quietly while she wrote something underneath them. When she finished, she pushed the notebook toward me, and there, in small, uneven handwriting, she had written, "Find work that helps me stay human." My throat tightened instantly, because somehow, my 14-year-old daughter had understood the lesson better than most adults ever do. I looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then finally, she smiled softly and said, "Mom, I think I understand now." I swallowed hard. "What do you understand?" She leaned back in her chair and whispered, "I don't actually want a life without work." A small pause. "I just don't want a life that makes me disappear." I realized something heartbreaking. Children are not asking us how to become rich. They are asking us whether adulthood is worth surviving at all.